Welcome, everybody, to the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. Today, I am so pleased to be able to present Dana Amarisa, and she's going to be speaking to us about condolences, and she will be talking about her experiences as a grieving person and what led her to write a book about condolences due to all of the not so wonderful condolences that she received. For those of you that are maybe here for the first time, my name is Susan Barber, and I curate the community education program for the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, which is a great thing to be able to do. And for those of you that may not know about the foundation, or this might be new to you, just a little bit of information that we give at the top of every event. The Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization that was inspired by the life of psychiatrist, humanitarian, and hospice pioneer, Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. Though Elisabeth is often described as the death and dying lady or the creator of the 5 stages, she often referred to herself as the life and living lady. In that spirit of embracing all of life, which includes death, we furthered the mission and vision of Elisabeth through the work of the foundation. Essential to her work was a deeply held belief that unconditional love is the most healing medicine of all. And I just want to give you a little bit of information about what's currently going on with the foundation. And in the meanwhile, if people want to put up where you are zooming in from in the chat, that would be great. And to note, this is being recorded. It will go up on the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's YouTube channel as soon as Ken Ross comes back from the project in Guatemala. He's there this week opening an 18-bed respite center in Guatemala for cancer patients that will provide free medical services for those recovering from chemotherapy. And that is one of the foundation's chapters. There's also a chapter in Singapore that's developing a compassionate community program with St. Luke's Hospital there. They just hosted for East Asians a symposium on palliative care and end-of-life care, and they will be hosting people throughout the year. Ken will be going to East Timor soon to work with that chapter as it's developing. EKR Foundation in Chile initiated the first pediatric hospice there. They're developing end-of-life programming with Stanford University. Started the Green Burial Movement in Mexico, and the chapter president there, Wilke Roig, also offers 8-week education programs through the foundation. And she just provided the first doula training for INELDA and in Mexico for Spanish-speaking doulas. So there is a lot going on, including today we got an email from the gentleman who there's 7 locations of the foundation chapters in France and in Japan, where they are just going to reinstitute the life, death, and transition workshops that Elisabeth was beloved by Elisabeth. So thank you all for being here. I see people are here from all over the country and also from other countries. And with that, I just want to say a few words about Dana and then give her the floor or the Zoom room so that she's able to take on the workshop here. After surviving the loss of her daughter and her dad and then her son in a 20-month period, she developed a very personal relationship with about every version of the worst thing anyone could say to a grieving friend. Before those losses changed her life, she was a person who was saying many of the same condolence type things that were hurtful, she realized. During her losses, grief transported her to the other side of a giant but invisible canyon, away from friends and family, and nobody knew how to bridge that gap. She realized that with her background as a marketing writer, that she could write a little book that she could give to her friends and her family that would explain what it was a grieving person needs, what she needed when she couldn't explain anything. Took her a bit of time to start that writing process and a little bit more time to complete it. But the Condolence Pocket Guide, What to Say and What to Not Say to Grievers, has been extraordinarily well received. And I just am so grateful. I've heard Dana offer workshops to our San Francisco End of Life Coalition. I'm very grateful that she's here with us today. My sense is that loss and grief is a universally connecting experience that all of us have, and many, including myself at times, don't really know what to say or what it is that would be the best thing to offer to a grieving person. So with that, I'm going to bring Dana down here. Dana, would you just go ahead and introduce yourself? I'm going to take myself out of this spotlight here. And welcome. I'm so happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Susan, so much. Was there one last thing you
I
wanted
was
to?
going to say one last thing. Dana and I talked earlier this morning about kind of rolling this out, what this workshop would look like. And usually we do about an hour of a presenter speaking about their work or their book, and then have a Q&A. But Dana has done this enough to realize that having some more interaction is useful. So there'll be opportunities for people to raise their hand. Using the Zoom, there's a large number of you here, and at the bottom of the screen in most cases, you'll find a place that will say raise your hand, either after the more with 3 buttons, or sometimes there's a smiley face that gives you that option. You can also put in chat any kind of question you may have. I'm monitoring the chat, and I'll be happy to sort of raise my hand or let Dana know that there's questions in the chat. That's all that I wanted to know. And thank you so much, Dana, for being here.
Thank you, Susan. I am so happy to be here because actually talking about with people in a conversation about how to really offer something that's truly useful to a person who is sad is one of my most favorite conversations to have. And as Susan mentioned, this all came about because our dear and beautiful friends said things that were so well-meaning and so difficult to bear. And I noticed that it was consistent. It wasn't just a few here and there. It was like over and over and over again. And my husband and I really needed their support. But when I was grieving, I wasn't in any kind of shape to be telling anyone how to support me. But I realized, as Susan mentioned, that as a writer, maybe I could put together a little book. So this is the book. Oops. Condolences Pocket Guide. It's available on Amazon. I'm going to put all this stuff in the chat at the end of the meeting, all the steps that we do, my contact information, everything you'll need. So you can just feel free to participate. So after writing the book, I realized that this was way bigger than a book, that people wanted to be in conversation. So I founded the Be a Bridge Condolences Project, and that's to help change the conversations we have with people who are sad about anything, be it a friend or family member or a coworker at work or someone, even an acquaintance you only sort of know. There's ways to connect with them that have a good impact. So tonight we're going to talk about and do some practice together. It's going to be really interactive, only for those who want to. If you're not comfortable, then just enjoy watching the show. But we're going to talk about the 3 steps to offering truly helpful condolences, and the 3 types of listening. And so you can learn to listen deeply. And then the 4 styles of condolences that are better left unsaid, and how to write a condolence note. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, but I think once you understand how to make this shift, you can use it anywhere in your life. So going back to the awkwardness that we experienced, I still, even after writing this book and leading workshops, come face to face with my own awkwardness when I have to give, when I want to give a condolence. Is there anyone in the group who feels awkward in this process? You want to just say yes in the chat if you. How about you? Has anyone stuck their foot in their mouth? I have, and I'll give you that story. Have you avoided or delayed reaching out to someone when you know that they will notice, and because you didn't know what to say? Yep. And has it altered friendships? This issue of not being able to connect. When we were grieving, we lost our favorite go-to friends, a couple who lived near us, because they couldn't understand why after a year, we couldn't get back to like doing our share of friendship. And that's something that is, and I couldn't explain it. I felt terrible about it. I didn't know it was normal, and they didn't understand it. And so that was a loss that we suffered as a result of our losses. And it happens to a lot of people. It's not our fault or our friend's fault. It's that none of us was informed. So once I recovered a bit from those losses, I started doing some research, and I noticed that there were some trends on both sides, with the grievers and with the friends and family. And on the friends side, I noticed that people got stuck thinking, oh, there's a right way to do it, and I have to be an expert or I'm not going to say the right thing. They also were worried that it actually came down to dealing with death was hard for them, because in our culture, we don't talk about it. But there was something even below that when we got down, when the conversations went a little deeper, and it was very consistent that people were afraid that they would have to grieve that hard someday, as hard as they were seeing their friend or their colleague grieve. And there's research that shows that people are more afraid of grieving than they are afraid of death. And so it's this resistance that comes out in our condolences without thinking about it, without understanding it. It shows up in what we say. And we're going to look at how to make sure it doesn't show up. So on the other side, on the grievers side, what I saw were a lot of similarities. And I talked to a lot of people because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just me. And before I go on, any of the talks that we do here, this is for how to give consolation. This is not, even though everyone here has likely grieved something or may even be grieving something, this is not a grief support group. I'm not a grief counselor, and I have done my research on how we can best help those who are grieving. So grief may even come up as we're talking, but we need to keep it on the topic of consolation and condolences. So anyway, on the griever's side, what they were going through is that they had lost their social protections. We walk around in the world with protection from the knowledge that we're going to die someday, because how difficult would it be to go through life with, if that was like right here every day, oh no, we're going to die. Oh, it would be, we would get stalled out trying to make decisions, everyday decisions. So we have some filters and protections that are socially agreed upon. But when someone is sitting there with the unrelenting absence of their person, that protection is stripped away. Death is in their face. And so grievers felt different. They saw that they were really sensitive to everything, whereas in the past, they used to just let stuff blow over. They felt everything very deeply. They noticed the difference between their friends and themselves, and they felt shocked and worried about how they had changed. They felt embarrassed about that difference. Some felt alone, afraid, overwhelmed, unseen, misunderstood, but they all felt this gap. And all of this was on top of their loss. So they can't meet us halfway. They can't do their half of a friendship or any kind of relationship. They're just struggling to reinvent themselves without their person and with all this mourning and grief coming up in their lives. Has anyone noticed this gap before? Has anyone experienced it? I'd love to hear from someone if they wanted to share that. From a friend or a family member or a coworker.
Kathy, Kathy had her hand up. for
Right.
quite some time. I'm not sure if it's about this particular, to answer this question, but Kathy, do you want to unmute if you have a question to ask? And then Karen has raised her hand, and so did Wendy in response to this.
Right.
Sorry, I think it was actually a slip of my hand down at the bottom, so I didn't mean to.
Well, now that you're
Anna.
here, have you had an experience like this where you felt like it wasn't working? Like,
In the early, I had a lot of people around supporting me, especially in the very, very early stages, just when my husband died, and helping me with all the very physical paperwork and processes that needed to be done. But honestly, it's been 4 years for me, but when I look back on that time, I was completely numb. I could not have, I would say thank you when people spoke to me about their concern, but yeah, it just in a way kind of all washed over me.
right.
Until about year 2 or 3, then I really sort of thought back about it, what was going on.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, is there anyone in the group who, as a friend and family trying to offer consolation, who's noticed this like tension?
Karen, were you responding to the earlier question? Is this something that you can respond to? You're welcome to.
Yeah.
Can you ask the question again? This is a new
Oh.
question now, because I
well,
was responding to the first question.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, why don't you repeat the question again that you were posing?
If, note that there's this discrepancy between the way grievers are feeling without having any of their social protections and the way we friends and families still with our protections in place, and there can be a disconnect and trouble finding a common ground.
I completely agree with you. And this is such an eye-opener for how you're describing it, because that's how I felt. Was I would tell my friends I'm grieving over a loss, and then they would say, oh, I'm sorry. And then like 20 seconds later, they're talking about what they're eating for lunch. And I just felt not held by my friends. And so I isolated myself because I just felt so completely lost by that response.
Yeah, Karen, that's really common. And yeah, and so that's what we're here for, to try and figure out how that happens. Not to try, but I'm going to show you why that's happening and how we can make sure we're not doing that to someone who's grieving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Someone else?
Yes, Wendy had her hand up. And
Yeah, I
do you
did.
want to?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
there you go.
My one of my daughters died about 2.5 years ago, and my health went a downturn. So that was a double. People didn't know what to say, so they would ask my husband, or my kids would call him, like, "Is mom going to die? No one wanted to bother me, or they just were fearful, or people would pretend. And then later I'd hear, oh, that she looked awful. So I felt like there was this whole conversation going on about me without me. So
Yes, and the feeling of isolation and separation that happens because of that is really common. I think we have time to take one more, and then we need to move on.
Okay, Jalisa, hopefully I'm not saying that too terribly wrong. Do you want to unmute yourself?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you got it right. It's Jalisa. Yeah, I have two sides of this. I was the griever and the grievee. I had a situation where it was an acquaintance. So she just started that job, and literally like 3 days into the job, her husband got shot. And I was like, wow, that was that tension that you were talking about. It's like, I'm gonna have to avoid you, because at the time I didn't know what to say, what to do. I mean, what can you say when your husband is shot?
Right. Who has words for that?
Right. But then, quick, in a nutshell, my after a few months, my brother died March 30th of this year. And then I'm on the other end of the spectrum.
Mhm.
But I don't know, I had such a huge support group, and they are all wonderful. I tell them I'm not okay, and they're like, it's okay to not be okay. And I don't know, I think I'm very, very privileged with the friends that I have. Maybe because I'm younger, maybe because we are all understanding the mental health thing, but I didn't have an awkwardness. They were like, yeah,
That's
that,
great. Well, I'm
yeah.
really happy for you. That's
I know,
beautiful.
and I know that like there's a lot of awkwardness, and I think I just want to like show people you don't have to be awkward about it. The whole thing just sucks, and it's sad, and it's okay.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Yelisa. So what do? How do we bridge this gap? Well, first of all, we're going to learn how to take a tiny but scary little shift that reduces this gap down to something manageable where there's a place to relate to each other. And that's where my 3 steps to caring condolences comes in. So who here would like to do a short experiential 3 steps to caring condolences?
Dana Sula had her hand up. I don't know if she would be volunteering for this, but since she had her hand up.
Oh,
for
no,
the
we're
first-
all going to do it together.
Thank you. Perfect.
Sorry, that wasn't clear.
Okay.
All right. With your
Maybe-
permission, I would love to do this with the whole group because we need to learn how to do this. And there's no other way to do it but do it. So with your permission, everyone, anyone who wants to do this, get comfortable in your seat, put your pens and papers aside, take a deep breath, close your eyes if you would like to, and think of a person that is either currently in your life or in the past where you were their support system or are their support system, and you have some anxiety about your role. Get that person in that situation firmly in your mind. And now we're going to go take another breath down into your belly. And we're going to go to step 1, which is to move your focus off the griever and onto yourself. So let's disrupt that automatic urge to focus on the griever and turn toward ourselves. And this is where we take a look at ourselves to get us out of our heads, out of our fight or flight response in the amygdala, and we connect to the wisdom of our bodies or our intuition. Do whatever grounding practice serves you. Some people put a hand on your heart, others breathe down into their hips and legs, whatever you're comfortable with. And notice how you feel when you think about having to interact with that person. Not how they are, how you are. Which is step 2. We look with kindness and curiosity when picturing your friend and their situation. Are you nervous? Irritated by their crying? Impatient that their grief has gone on so long? Have this uncontrollable urge to fix them? This strong pull to say something no matter what? Maybe you're angry that they've changed or afraid of doing the wrong thing. Just notice it with kindness and curiosity. No need to change it. Just see it. This is how we drop our guard and become vulnerable. This is how we drop our protection. Now that we're vulnerable, like the griever is vulnerable, we can be that bridge over to them, which is step 3. So from this new vantage point, what do you feel moved to do for them or say to them? What comes to you? Take a moment and see what emerges, what arises within you. And when you feel comfortable, take a deep breath, come back into the room that you're in, come back into our group here, open your eyes. And that thought of something to do or something to say that feels generous and open, those are what I call be a bridge style condolences. They make a bridge between you and the other person. It's where we decide that we're going to risk our fears and fear of being stupid or doing the wrong thing, that our discomfort is not more important. Our comfort is not more important than their discomfort. So, is there anyone in the room who felt that shift, who might want to share what they noticed that was different?
Sasha, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. That was really powerful just to arrive in my body like that. The first thing that really came to me was, I'm sorry that I wasn't there for you. And I didn't know what to say. Just
That's really beautiful. Simple, honest. That's something that would be a gift to hear if you're grieving. Thank you, Sasha.
Mhm.
Anyone else like to share something or have any questions that arose, new ideas about what you might want to do?
Wendy, why don't you?
Yeah, I shifted from feeling a little anxious to, I really feel like I'm hurting with you.
Hmm.
So that's what came for me.
Oh, that's lovely. That's great. Anyone else? Well,
No.
those are really good examples. And you can notice the difference. Oh, Patrick has a raised hand. Susan, you're muted.
Patrick is muted as well.
Oh,
There you go.
There you
sorry,
are.
I know better than that. You know, I just, when I felt into this, I just wanted to be quiet and be there, open to listening, to holding them, their story, but just to be quiet. That was the biggest urge.
Thank you. I'm really glad you brought that up because.
By the way.
Mira, look it, he's got it. Thank you.
You rock.
Oh, thanks so much, Patrick. That's such a good point that sometimes saying nothing is the most loving and generous thing we can do. Telling them that I'm here, I'm standing with you, and I'm not going anywhere no matter how ugly cry you do, I'm here. So, yeah, really good comments. And that can lead us right into the 4 types of unhelpful condolences. Actually, let's go into the listening thing, since that's what Patrick was just saying. Let's do that first. So listening is really crucial, because how are we going to know what a griever needs unless we have our mouth closed and ears open? They need to feel accepted and heard and seen, and because they feel ugly and unlovable from all their mourning. At least I did, and so many did. So let's look at the 3 types of listening that I want to cover today. The most common is called selective listening, and that's when we're distracted or we're listening for just one specific thing. Usually it's when we're waiting our turn. Like, I'm listening for there to be a space so I can say what I have to say. And I call that hijacking, because it does not acknowledge what the other person says. It leapfrogs right over them and any response that we could give them into our story. And it's very common. Often people think, oh, that's the way I show that I'm really listening, by sharing a story that's so similar. No, that actually doesn't happen to be the way that people feel listened to. And so, but it's so common. And again, from this nervousness to want to connect, and instead of, okay, let me sit with my anxiety and see what I can listen to. The second type of listening is called active listening, and it's used a lot in negotiations and therapy, counseling, couples counseling, or what's that called when you're trying to resolve conflict?
Mediation.
I'm sorry?
Mediation.
Yes, thank you. Mediation. And that is where we give feedback that's a repeat of what's been said. I'm hearing you say you're feeling sad and angry. And it's to let them know in a charged situation that I understand, I did hear what you said. And that's better than selective listening. But the most helpful thing is deep listening. Someone is not muted. I'm getting some noise over here.
They're muted now. Yeah.
Okay. So deep listening is what we did when we were doing the 3 steps. We've dropped our agenda. We've admitted we have an agenda. Either we're afraid, or we wish we could tell our story, or we're impatient for them to be done. And we have realized that that's not going to be helpful, and we sit with our discomfort. And from that place, we can truly listen. We can be empathetic. We can connect. Now, studies have shown that people know when they're being listened to deeply. If you're sitting 10 people in a room with the same expression on their face, people can say that person is not listening to me. We have this sense, just like we also know when we're being watched, even if we can't see someone, that we have these heightened senses. We don't always know where they come from, but we know. And so to try and fake it with someone who's grieving is not going to work, because they're going to know. And sometimes they know before we know that we're anxious, or that we don't know what to do, or we wish that this whole thing could just disappear. But if we can take a deep breath, with practice, you'll learn to do that 3-step exercise that we just did, with your eyes open, standing, talking to someone. At first, you might need to take a bathroom break and sit there and do that thing, but you'll get to the point where you can just go, oh, there it is. I really want to fix this. And you'll take a deep breath and breathe down. Oh man, I'm hating this. Okay, me hating this. Can we and my hating this kind of listen together? And we try, the attempt to suppress how we feel or shove it aside is going to cause us to say condolences that suppress the person or try and shove aside their emotions too. There's no way around it. If you have an unspoken agenda, it will show up in the condolence. Let's look at 4 types of unhelpful condolences and how they manifest this. So the first I'd like to cover is spiritual condolences. Now, there are a lot of spiritual things to say if you have a relationship with someone where you talk about spiritual ideas on a regular basis. But if you don't, then treading on their spiritual beliefs at a time when they can't defend themselves is very difficult to take. There are a lot of people who told me my dad was in a better place, and I don't carry that belief. And so I just wanted to shake them and say, well, where do you get off playing God with me? You know, you have your God, I have mine. But I couldn't because I was grieving and they meant so well. So the other problem with spiritual thoughts is that spiritual condolences is that they're more thoughts than they are a heartfelt response. Like God only gives you as much as you can handle. That is a mental construct. And it's also an admonition to handle yourself, to get a handle on yourself. And does anyone have any spiritual condolences that they've heard or used that they'd like to suggest? Yeah, Mari.
Mari, do you want to go ahead? And if you can turn on your camera, that would be, I can drop you
Hi,
down.
yeah, I can
Okay,
turn on the
thank
camera.
you.
Hi, sure. To me, it's spiritual, although it may not be for everyone, but it's everything happens for a reason.
Yes.
Because to me, that's a spiritual belief that gets kind of couched as non-spiritual, but I think it is.
Right. And what is the problem with these is that they carry a message. I'm telling you this because I want you to stop your crying because you have no reason to cry. There's a reason for this and you need to get on board with that and then you won't be crying. And so these carry this payload that isn't spoken, but is very obvious to the recipient anyway. Thank you.
Michaela, I'm just gonna, there's a couple of people, Michaela and then Paula, who can't get her hand to go up. And because Patrick just shared, then maybe we could come back to Sandra, and if there's time, then have Patrick again. Yes, there, Mary just put up in the chat my let's say favorite in a sarcastic way. Thoughts and prayers to you. But why don't you go ahead? Oh, where did her hand go?
I took it down. I have dear friends who are atheists, and I was raised a strict Catholic. And I finally twisted around and worked through that I can say with comfort that I can hold you, I'm holding you close in my hearts and prayers. And I don't know.
That's beautiful.
I don't know how that gets anywhere, but it resonates for me and it seems to cover bases, which is important.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michaela.
Yes. Paula, do you want to unmute yourself?
I am.
Okay, I'm looking for you here.
Look for big rhododendrons that are kind of yellowish.
No, I'm actually,
And
I won't be able to find you without.
okay.
that. Okay.
So, yeah, so talk about hurtful things being said about spirituality. My sister was dying of cancer, and knowing that our whole family is atheist, she told me that she was going to miss me when she was in heaven.
Oh, wow.
And it was like the triple, quadruple whammy. And I just had to look at her and say, I'm going to miss you too when you're gone. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm so sorry. Uh, yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now, oh, I thought Kathy. So we have Patrick and Elisa that have their hands up again. Why don't you go ahead, Patrick?
Mhm.
And come back to find you here. And there you go.
Hello. Well, spiritual stuff is the worst of the worst of the worst. And I hear it all the time. And I especially am reactive to someone throwing a scripture passage out. Is sometimes even at the moment of death, and and there's almost always an implication to the quote the faithful, that if their faith was better or deeper, they wouldn't be grieving because they're in a better place. God needed another angel and that sort of thing. And it's like, oh my God. I mean, I suppose the right scripture passage in time might give someone some condolence, some inspiration, some comfort, but to blurt it out awkwardly as a cliche to deal with your own anxiety is so awful. It's so repugnant. And I say that, by the way, I should identify that I've been a hospice chaplain. My faith, my spirituality is out of the Christian tradition. And so it's not that at all. It's just how inappropriate and how insensitive it is.
I think you touched on something there, Patrick. It comes out of anxiety, and it is a way to really keep the pain off of the person who's saying it. It's a way of saying, I can't feel this pain, so I'm going to put it out there that this is how I'm dealing with it. And I would also like to say, like Patrick, you said, if two people have a history of talking about spirituality, then it may be okay. But even then, sometimes people, when they're deep in grief, that's not what they want to hear, no matter how long they've had it. But that would, if you're someone's best friend and they'd want to hear this, then of course. It's just when you don't know the other person's spirituality, or you don't have a history of talking spirituality with them, that's when it's really a violation of someone's sacred space.
Vulnerability.
Yes.
Well, I have known many people who I've had deep spiritual conversations with. I know them well and whatever. And the other factor for me, it's all, even if you know them and their spirituality and what might be comforting and what might not be, but there's a timing factor.
Yes.
That's a piece of it too. It's like, just because you can share deeply
Yes.
about your faith or spirituality doesn't mean you blurt out some
Yes.
cliche thing, or give some, it ends up being trite scripture verse. It's like, oh, not there, it's handled, you're good.
Thank
right
you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes. And Elisabeth has her hand up. Do we have time for one more?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself again?
Yeah, I'll be quick about it. I hated, like, he's with the Lord now, and I'm like, I'm pagan. But that's besides the point. He was just agnostic. And then second.
Oh, did you freeze?
It's not totally special, but I started. It's like, stop saying sorry. Oh.
You froze.
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
Is it better now? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of got irritated by hearing I'm sorry.
Oh. Which brings me to the next topic, that there's no way to know what's going to work for everyone. And all we can do is try. And if it doesn't work, to say, oh, I'm so sorry. What I want to say is, I don't know what to say, or I'm here with you.
I like that better. I started telling people, because I used to say I'm sorry a lot, but after me getting irritated by it, I now just say my heart's with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next type of condolence style to try to avoid, and that is advice and suggestions. Now, spiritual condolences often come off, at least the ones we've been talking about, come off as advice giving, cloaked in scripture or some kind of spiritual thought. But ones that are more overtly advice and suggestions, the reason why those don't work is grievers are already feeling one step down from us. They can't stop crying, their eyes are red, they're obsessing about needing to talk about the same things over and over again. They can't engage in social things, and so they already feel down here. And when we give advice that is not asked for, this is unsolicited advice, and that's what I'm talking about. If someone asks you, what should I do? Then there's parity. But grievers are looking for parity. And if we come in and we give some advice, we act as a mini, authority. And we have established a one-upsmanship, whether we intended to or not, where we are above them. And they already feel so terrible that they're now down here in the basement. So suggestions, a lot of people like to think that's not advice. Oh, well, that was a suggestion, it wasn't advice. Same thing. Have you ever thought of, well, don't you think it's time you start getting out now? Don't you think it's time to move on? Those are suggestions. And it's the same thing. But it's done in a beat around the bush kind of version of saying, I think you should get out now. I'm worried that you aren't moving on fast enough. So if anyone would like to say anything about this whole idea of suggestions, I'd love to hear from you.
There's one that, where did she just go? Sandra Green just put up. Another thing that people often say is they are not suffering anymore, they're with God. It's like, stop crying so much, don't feel bad because they are better off gone.
Yes.
And Sally said it's more like a power, like sort of a power relationship.
Yes, power is another way to look at this inequity.
Yeah,
The lack of parity is like, there's a power. I will not lower myself to the level of falling apart like you are.
yeah. And Althea suggests no suggestions. And she's saying, how about saying something like, how are you doing today?
Let's move on to the next one, which is question condolences.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are you doing today? That can work. I try and stay away from questions because questions are a shield. They don't tell anything about me. I'm doing this focus on you. And now you have to answer my question, which to a griever feels like a burden. I couldn't today. Well, I could tell you how I'm doing this nanosecond, because the last nanosecond I felt a different way than I do now. And who knows what'll happen in the next nanosecond. And also, what I want to know, I want vulnerability, and questions are a shield. I call it smoke and mirrors. We're taught that in polite culture, the way to show interest in a person is to ask them questions. How are you? What's going on with your life? But with someone who's grieving, they're fighting for their life. They're fighting for their peace of mind. There's nothing polite society about their situation. And so questions are a burden to them, and they don't reveal. When people would ask me, how are you? I'd want to say, why don't you tell me about yourself? But because I couldn't risk even the hint of a confrontation, I never said that. I would just say, I'm fine. How are you? And so that's another thing. Notice how they answer it. If they immediately turn it around. I had a girlfriend call me when a couple weeks after we lost our daughter. And she said, hey, Dana, how are you? And I said, I'm good. How are you? And she goes, well, I'm okay, but I meant, how are you? Well, I had given her my answer and she wouldn't accept it. And I wanted to hang up because I was telling her in the only way that I could that I couldn't talk about myself, that I wanted 5 minutes of something else with someone else. You know, 5 minutes of happy conversation about someone's football game or their kid's soccer match or some show they saw or a barbecue they had or went to. And it was like deer in the headlights every time I got a question. How do I answer that? Do I tell the truth? Do I not? So try to stay away from questions if you can. And sometimes I'll say when I run into someone, if I have my wits about me, I'm so happy to see you. You've been on my mind and in my heart. And that way they know that I know what happened to them. And they have the opportunity to say, oh, thank you. How are you doing? And then that's my cue that they don't want to talk about how they're doing. They want to have the luxury, the pure bliss of being in a superficial conversation, which they never get to do. So, yeah.
Tina, this is reminding me of, you may have met her. I'm not sure if you know Isabel Stenzel Burns, who is
Yes.
So Isabel's been quite ill this last year, and it's quite likely, like, we are holding out for a miracle, but she may be like days to weeks away from not being here on this plane with us any longer. And about a month ago, she's been just remarkable. She's been dropping breadcrumbs for everybody, like how she wants people to manage this for her. So NPR invited her to do a little piece. I'm going to post it because it's very short. It's like 5 minutes. How to say goodbye to someone you love, like when they're dying, and also kind of how to approach people, you know, with a great loss. And
Oh, I'm so happy to know about this.
what you just said, you know, she posts regularly in Caring Bridge and on Facebook about what's happening with her, and regularly will ask people, like, you know, what I want to hear about is, like, what did you do with your family this weekend? Have you gone hiking? Like, what did you see? Like, she wants, because she can't be out there anymore, out in the world so much. Like, she wants to hear what's going out on the world because everybody's so focused on, you know, this illness that she's navigating. And what you just said is just so spot on about sometimes you just need you just need time where that's not what you're focusing on. You're focusing on, there's a whole world out there that I can sort of engage with a little bit, and then I'm going to come back here. But I want to know a little bit more about what's out there, and then I'm going to come back here. So that just, that just reminded me of Isabel so much. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Susan. That's really
And
helpful.
of course, she was a bereavement coordinator for the last 12, 13 years. So she spent a lot of time navigating this with people. And yeah.
Cool. Let's go to the last of the 4 styles of condolences that are best avoided, and that is pep talks and silver linings. Again, those give the message that I need to change you into something more to my liking. I have this idea about how you should be acting, and so I'm going to urge you pep you into this other way of being. What are some pep talks that anyone, or silver lining condolences that anyone has come across? Anyone? Sally?
With animal grief, well, they had a really good life,
Yes.
or you had so many beautiful years with them, or
Yeah. Or even with humans, oh, he or she lived a good long life. Okay, we're not talking about them, we're talking about me. Yep. This isn't about me worried about they aren't happy. Oops, I'm freezing.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Ooh, somebody just put their hand down possibly. Somebody did put up, Mary put up in the chat one that she has heard is you'll feel better when you get busy or get back to work.
Yes.
And Paula has her, oh, or you have 2 other children after a child's death.
Ugh.
Yeah, well, he lived a really long life.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yes.
Oh, I still miss him.
He's still my dad, and I just lost him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And another one is anything that starts with at least.
Mm.
That is the great minimizer. At least signals, I'm going to minimize what you were just talking about or what you think is important.
Yeah. Janet, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi. The worst thing for me after my husband died was people saying he would want, he would want you to be happy. He would want you to go on. That would just irritate me to no end. I would just want to grab them by the ears and scream into their face. You didn't even know what he wanted. How did you, like, it just,
Right.
I mean, this to me is just absolutely absurd especially when it's people that don't even, like acquaintances, like,
Right.
yeah.
And the idea that someone a person is trying to explain your loved one to you, thinking that you need them explained to you. Yeah.
And I mean, I find, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, I think we all have a better, well, not a better, but a whole different understanding of our person after they've passed.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, when my husband died, I found out, I didn't find out things, but I mean, I found things that it's just like, oh my gosh, I wish I had known about this, that we could have shared this together,
Yeah. Mhm.
Thanks.
And these are all people, again, who give pep talks. It's their way of saying, I can't deal with you in this place that I have relegated to down. And so I'm going to pep you up into this place that I find more comfortable. And there's really nothing you can do if that's what's coming out of someone's mouth. But what we're here to do is to figure out how to make sure that we don't say those things. Here's the one that I said for all you guys. If you ever feel bad about anything you may have said, this is after I lost my 2 kids and my dad. I said, when I was introduced to someone who was a friend of a friend, and he had a big scar on his neck, and I asked him, I said, oh, did you have an injury? And he said, no, I have lung cancer. And I said, oh, were you a smoker? That is like, so that's like saying you deserve, because if you were, you deserve it. You deserve to die. And I saw this stricken look on his face, and I heard what came out of my mouth, and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I have a lot of friends who aren't smokers, and they didn't get lung cancer. And if you were to be generous enough to give me another chance, what I'd really like to say is, I'm so sorry that you have lung cancer. And he said, well, yeah, I didn't smoke because I thought because I wanted to get cancer. And I said, I know, I deeply apologize. It's a really crappy thing to say. And then it actually opened up the conversation where he could talk about his cancer with me, and I could listen and to his experience of it. So I'm not saying to say crappy things so you can have this turnaround, but if you find yourself in the position of foot in mouth, the process of saying, whoops, I'm so sorry, please let me start over, this is what I wish I'd said, can actually open a door, because that is an act of vulnerability to go, oh, I blew it. That was my bad. I know that is a terrible thing to say. And people, again, grievers are wanting vulnerability. So take it from me, we are so conditioned by culturally to say these things and to protect ourselves and to not let people in and to do one-upsmanship, that even as a condolences coach, even as someone who has suffered deep losses, I say terrible things. All right, or I did. So let's move on.
Nina,
Yes.
maybe, I think you're going to address this possibly next, but Anne, well, Laura had also said that another thing that she's heard is at least he died quickly and didn't suffer. So, and also not directed at the person who's actually grieving. And Anne asked, how can we respond skillfully to these unhelpful questions? Or,
Now,
yeah.
that is something for a grief counselor, because when you're grieving, figuring out what you are capable of saying and not saying is out of my bailiwick. When I was grieving, I never, ever found a way to respond. I just smiled and tried to exit as soon as I could, because I couldn't. But I spent a lot of time talking to my grief counselor about what could I say? How can I defend myself? And I couldn't even say I don't want to talk about it. It wasn't until like 10 years later that I found a way when people would say, well, how old was your daughter? I'd say, well, I learned to say, instead of talking about the details of losing her, what I would be happy to share who she was if you're interested. And that was a way to reroute it in a kind way. So yeah, those are questions for a grief. That is a question for a grief counselor. Thank you though. So I would like to move on to our last topic while we still have a little bit of time here, and that is how to write a condolence note. And again, these steps will be published. I'm going to publish them all in the chat at the end. So to start off, I'm a writer. I wrote this book. I've worked as a writer my entire career, marketing writer, journalist, tech writer, every kind of writer, and now author. So I have some skills. But the biggest difference between me and people who think they can't write is not my writing skills. The biggest difference is that folks who think they can't write think that it takes some special skill and that they should give up. The biggest thing that I do that they don't do is I hang in there. Revision after revision after revision. I stick with the process. People think that because I'm good, I produce a good product, that it just flows out of my pen or out of my hands on the keyboard. Oh, honey, no. Sometimes I have those moments, but I go back and revise things. This 60-page stinky little book took 4 years. And it's not because there was a lot to write. It's because it took a long time to get down to the essence. And condolence notes will take a minute because you're only going to write a little bit. And so you want it to be helpful. So step one is to remember they want you, not your glorious ideas or theories on death or grief or anything. They want you. They want your heart and soul and the person that they know. Step two is to to decide if you're willing to tolerate feeling nervous or stupid or both, because that's what the process of writing and editing yourself is. Tolerating not knowing how to do this yet. Well, that's not right yet. Oh, it's still not right. Okay. And extending that kind curiosity to yourself in this process. Step 3 is to share from your heart. And how do you do that? You go back to the first exercise we did, where you turn your focus away from them. You look at your fears and concerns and anxieties, and you befriend them. You don't try and erase them or deny them. I think of it as putting them in one of those hobo knapsacks on a stick over your shoulder. Like, I'm just going to carry those worries in that little bandana tied up through this process. They're not going anywhere. They're here with me. They're like my pal. They're my baggage. And then you're going to notice the shift in your body. So those are the 3 steps again. All right. Step number 4 on writing condolence notes. Know it'll take a few drafts. So practice like this. If you're visual, write all your thoughts on a separate piece of paper. Just write them down. Just write them right. Oh, that won't work. Okay, let me try this. What if I said this? What if I said that? And then go through them and take the little bits that work. It'll take writing them down on something else and rewriting a bunch of times until you have it, and then you copy it into your condolence note. If you're auditory, say it out loud using one of those voice-activated memo things on your phone. And then you'll have it say all your thoughts out loud into the memo or note, and then read it. Oh, I like that. That sounds good. Oh, I like a piece of this and a piece of that. And then copy and paste the parts that you like into your message, whether it's an email or a text, or write it into a note that you're going to send. Step 5, remember, if it's hard, you're winning, because writing is hard. I'm a writer, I do that for a living, and it's hard. So if it's hard, you know you're on the right track. Number 6, stick with the process until you find something that you like. Just stick with it. Get up. Number 7 is get up and walk away. After you find something you like, get up and walk away. I forgot to write this down. Make yourself a cup of tea. Go to the bathroom, do something that's not what this is, and then come back and look at it, because you're going to see it in a different way. Oh, well, that won't work. I need to change these words. It's the getting up and walking away that makes a huge difference. So, and then number 8 is keep sticking with the process until you get it how you like it. So any questions or comments about the condolences or any other topic that we have covered here today? Because we're getting into... Actually, I would like to say one more thing. A topic that is deeply meaningful to me is, let's talk about misunderstood losses for just a bit. Misunderstood losses cause the griever to suffer a second loss. The first loss being the person they've lost, and the second loss being the loss of the support system they thought they had and they need. And if there's anyone here who can suggest what a misunderstood loss might be, please raise your hand or write it in the chat. What are some misunderstood losses? Patrick.
I know when my wife and I had 2 consecutive miscarriages, that, you know, a lot of people would say, well, you have children, or, well, you can always have another. And they just didn't seem to notice that the loss of our hope and the loss of a potential child crushed us unbearably. And
It's a
Yeah.
death.
yeah,
If you haven't met them, it's a death.
yeah. So that's misunderstood. For sure.
I see some other.
Joanna, do you want to go ahead? You've unmuted yourself. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to answer your question and then also speak to what you said. You needed a grief counselor needed to answer the question. I'm a grief counselor, and I don't think that there's really a perfect thing to say when somebody says things like that to you.
Right.
And I hate to say this actually, because it sounds like I'm giving the griever a responsibility, but what I mean really is more an affirmation of just it's okay that if you can't think of anything to protect yourself, that's all right.
Yep.
It's not your job. And you know, just find things that help you heal from what they said.
Yep.
That would be okay.
Like I said, it takes a grief counselor. There you go.
well, thank you. As for the misunderstood losses, that would also include things like, say, the family of somebody who went into a shopping center and started shooting people. You know, people, you know, that family, those parents are judged, and they can't really, it's a disenfranchised grief. They can't really say anything. Often it's the same way with parents who have lost a child to drug overdose.
Yep.
Or anybody who's lost someone to suicide.
Yep.
We just can't, you know, people just, well, it puts an extra burden on the griever because they feel a level of shame.
Yes.
But they can't say anything. So,
and there's a lack of compassion. Our compassion fades because we have this judgment, like, well, he was doing drugs. Really hard to skip over that too. It just doesn't matter how he died. This is a mother with a dead child. And
exactly.
we get all caught up in the details again, because we are hardwired to look for ways to protect me from your pain.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right.
Thank you. Dana, there's 2 more with their hands raised, and if then a lot of people have posted losses or unrecognized loss in the chat. So if they're not spoken about during the next 2.
Yeah.
Jill,
Right.
do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself? Jill Davis. Yeah, if you could unmute yourself, and then Renata, and then we'll go through the list.
Jill?
Okay,
Thank you.
unless I missed it, when you were talking about condolence messages, go have a cup of tea, take a little break, and then come back and look at what you've written. I think it should be more than a cup of tea. I think it should be at least a day or two to look at what you've written, because it can change dramatically in a day or two.
That's a really good point, Jill. And in some cases, you'll look at it and you realize it's still not good, but you don't know what to do about it. And in that case, you're right, it may take extra time.
Mhm.
What I am offering is people can be looking for any excuse not to write this thing because they have so many insecurities about being a writer. And sometimes like 5 minutes is a good enough space. So, but you're right, everyone needs to find their time frame for getting some distance from what they're writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Renata, welcome back.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Susan. And thank you so much, Dana.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you. So this is amazing. So my question is in reference to the part when you said, I need some clarification. When you said, okay, how are you? And what you wanted to hear was, gee, how was the, baseball game today? How are other kids doing? Besides an obvious, how would somebody know to start talking about their life? Because in other words, I guess I feel like that would be selfish I feel like it would be selfish to start.
well, no, I make an opening, but I leave it less pointed than asking a direct question. How are you? I say, I'm so glad to see you. And then I wait to see what they say. And if they say, oh, I'm having a terrible time or burst into tears, then I know that they want to talk about that. If they say, oh, good, I'm glad to see you too, then that is my cue. They don't want to go any further with the how they are. That's their answer, and I need to take their answer. So thank you for clarifying that, because I can see how that could have been confusing.
Yeah, thank you. Because I imagine each situation is individual and different and could pick up on a cue or not. But I guess like I was saying, I would feel selfish in, talking about what was going on if the person was sitting there grieving. So it's hard, that's what I was wondering.
Well, if they are actively mourning, then of course not.
Yeah.
But
just so pick up on their cues.
I'm actually talking about, like, if you run into someone in public, hey, how are you doing? That's a common thing that I try not to say around someone who's grieving. I say, oh, Renata, I'm so glad to see you.
Okay, that opens it up. Got it. That totally opens it. I see. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
And then Dana, some of the other or misinterpreted or unrecognized loss, child loss if you're not the parent, miscarriage was spoken about, animal death, military death, where the comment is something like they signed up for the military, so they knew they were putting their life on the line. One person shared, also a refugee losing their country of origin. Divorce came up several times. Parents who have lived a long life in their 90s or hundreds. Marginalized losses, also addiction, suicide, or mental illness. And one person shared that she never read one condolence card or note when her husband died. That was 6 years ago. They're all still kept in a box. Not one word would have been felt by me at the time. Alzheimer's or other dementia where the person someone knew and loved may have faded away, and ideas of they're not there anymore. They're not there. There's, mom's gone before mom actually dies. People who are evicted lose their homes. People who died of COVID because they wouldn't wear a mask or be vaccinated. That was a lot of people and families that were navigating that in the recent years. Let me see if there's any more down here. Also the changes in relationships.
Yep.
People, the downplaying of people who have had a pet loss, and how that's very downplayed and misunderstood. Unexpected hysterectomy. And so then there's a question that leads right into what you, I think, are going to do next. Do you have an example of an appropriate note? Could you offer an example of appropriate condolence note?
Okay, so the answer is yes and no. Whatever, again, they're looking for you. And so what comes from your mind and heart will be helpful. Sometimes I buy a card that says thinking of you, or one that doesn't have any words on it. And if it doesn't say thinking of you, I start off with, I'm thinking about you every day. I wish there was something I could do that would take away this huge loss that you've suffered. By the way, there's a list of helpful condolences to say in my book. In one of the appendix, it has that list. It's really just one line. I wish I knew what to say. I just want you to know that I love you. When a coworker has a loss, I write them and say, even though we don't know each other very well, I am so very sorry for your loss. People are people, and loss is very difficult. So,
Dina, one question I have, I will often, I'm rarely writing anymore because this is something to do though. But when I do write a condolence, what I've done in the past I've shared an experience that person and I had, the person who's died. Like, it was so wonderful that time that Bob and I went to, do you remember when we were all together on that whatever picnic or
that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and I look forward to talking with you when you're ready, and sharing more of these experiences. They were so meaningful to me, something that I feel, and I don't want to be inappropriate, that is not probably where they're at right that minute, but sometime in the future. I remember a friend of mine whose 2-year-old died in his sleep, no warning. And one of the things that she finds, people just stop talking about him. And I try to always include him in conversations about her 2 living children, and remember Avery as well. And she is very grateful because she says, that it's like people think that he's been dead this many years. Maybe I've just forgotten that I had a child who died at 2.
Right, or that
don't ever forget that, or anybody.
Right, or that bringing him up will be bringing him up at a time when I might not be thinking about him.
Yeah.
Well, there just isn't a time,
Yeah.
So thank you very much. To say their name, I heard someone say, I just wish I could hear someone use my son's name in a sentence. And so, yeah, that's really helpful.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. So, what about, there's a couple other misunderstood losses, bankruptcy, any kind of financial catastrophe. That is a loss that people feel a lot of shame about, and they either won't tell anyone, or no one will talk to them about it. Lung cancer diagnosis. It's well documented that people with lung cancer do not get empathy as nearly as often as people with other forms of cancer or illness. Retirement. Yep, and getting fired, that's huge. There's shame involved, and so it's really hard to navigate that. Does anyone have any questions about all the information that we have been talking about. Any question on any of the subjects?
Sasha wants to.
So would you put the 3 steps down below for us to have again?
I'll do that right now because that is, yeah. So you guys will have them before I go.
Yeah, and also, there will be an email, and Dana's going to send me, some of the steps of writing those are these 3 steps. She'll send those to me, and I can send. She's going to post them here in the chat, but I'll also send them out in an email. And then, because people have been asking about the recording, and again, for those that came in late, this has been recorded, and we're going to share that as soon as Ken Ross, who takes this all and puts it up on the YouTube page for the foundation. He will do that when he gets back from Guatemala, and that's probably going to be in about 10 days. So you'll get an email soon with the information from Dana that will be repeated in the second email with a link to the video that's going to be up on the YouTube page. Somebody just asked, any helpful condolences for a young friend who just received a 3 to 6 month diagnosis?
You know, I don't have a lot of experience dealing with people with illness, but I do know, I would say, I don't even know how we navigate this. I don't even know where we go, but just know that wherever it is, I'm going to be with you, that I'm here, that I'm glad I know you, and I'm going to be with you. I'd love it if someone wants to chip in. Yeah, Joanna, you do.
You want to unmute?
Yes, and I actually what we usually refer to as the phases of grief, and probably I'm speaking to the choir, y'all all know this. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross came up with those by working with hospice patients, and those stages are really what we go through as we're approaching death. And so I would say get really familiar with what those stages are again. Listen for those from the things that your friend is saying, so that you can affirm that what she's going through is normal and natural. You can express compassion about that. Do a lot of listening and affirmation. She's not expecting you to change the diagnosis or to fix everything for her. You don't have to do that. Just be there for her and be prepared to help encourage her when you hear, for instance, anger or bargaining or denial. She just needs assurance that that's normal and it's okay for her to express them. And so that's what I would say. And I just also want to say that just because I'm a grief counselor, that doesn't make me the expert. The reason I signed up for this is that when I make the first calls after one of our patients dies, I work with hospice. I don't always know the family members, and I'm not always sure that what I'm going to say is the right thing. So I really, really appreciate this. You helped me a lot.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I think that's a very good point. If it's not that we wait until we're certain, it's that we are willing to take a risk with as much as we know now. And I remember a friend, I got very few cards when we lost our daughter because we lost her due to a failed adoption, and people were very dismissive, very dismissive. And a friend of mine, their empathy just went out the door. Well, didn't you know this could happen? You should have protected yourself, blah, blah, blah. And so a friend of mine who is not a good writer, had lots of misspellings, wrote me a note. And I was so touched by that because she is so self-conscious about her writing. And she wrote anyway. And the people who did anything, it was deeply meaningful to me. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I think right now, because I want to be respectful of time at 6:30, I think that both Dana and I can be in the room a little bit longer. One person just put up that when their husband died, people kept asking her, what did she need? What do you need? What could I get you? And she was incapable of responding to that, because really just staying alive was enough work to do. And I read, I think in the New York Times this morning, just a little piece about a woman, I think it was the Times, it was called Grief Groceries. And the woman said that her family member had just died. And a friend just texted her and said, are you going to be home at 6:30? I'm not coming over, but I'm sending something. And they sent Instacart groceries, just random things like sweet stuff, ice cream, some cookies, and then some more solid groceries. And then another friend sent a stack of gifts. They took a collection and they sent about $250 worth of gift cards to local restaurants so that they could go out to eat on the days where she couldn't even bear to make any food or get dinner together. And I think those kinds of things can be very useful for people that are grieving, because it's just.
I read that too, and that I was so glad that was out there. I cover that in my book, that instead of saying, what can I do for you, which puts the burden on them of figuring it out, if you say, I'm going to Costco on Tuesday and I'm going to get some frozen food, can I get you some lasagna or something else? Then they know the scope of what you're willing to do. Or I could mow your lawn for you or wash your car. Would you like that? Then they know they can say yes or no. And that's about all I was capable of doing.
Yes, that's right. Well, I want to thank everybody that's been here today, Dana. I want to thank you as well. I'm going to just put something up in the chat. Sally has asked how you would like people to purchase your book. It says, is it best through Amazon? Is it best through a specific vendor? And if you have that information, just to put it up in the chat, maybe. So
I am so sorry I don't have another vendor yet. I need to. So Amazon is it. I'm working on it though. Yeah.
So I just want to, I put up a link. Thank you for those who are here and were able to make a donation. We recognize that not everybody's in that position. But just to know that the foundation, these community events are offered at no cost, so as many people can come as possible. And the only way that this is supported is really through the donations. Could you put up the Amazon link perhaps, Dana, because people are asking for it?
So that is in the thing that I just posted. It's right at the top, Condolences Pocket Guide, under my email address. But I'll do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I want to just thank you, Dana. I'll also say that Dana donated copies of her book. Another unrecognized loss is incarceration in this country. Huge numbers of our community are incarcerated, some of them through no fault of their own or being unjustly accused of crimes they did not commit. There's grieving every day. So this is going to be very useful.
Thank you, Susan, so much.
Yeah,
for
and I'm going to
commenting about incarceration.
Thank you, Sally. I'm just going to put
I do have one thing though. If people would like to be ways they could help is to write a review of my book.
That would be wonderful.
I want this book to be available to as many people as possible. That's why I kept the price down and the size down, and I wrote it at a 6th grade reading level, so anyone, even a non-native speaker, could read it, because I want this information out. And the way to get it up on the Amazon site is to have more reviews.
Yes.
So thank
that's
you.
Very true. Well, I'm gonna, just 1 second, I'm going to just thank you all for being here. Our next event, which has not been put up, but you'll all get an email about it when it is on July 18th. That's a Tuesday at 10 a.m. with Barbara Carnes, and she's going to be specifically focusing on caregiving and myths and misinterpretations and misunderstandings about hospice and end-of-life care. So on behalf of the foundation, thank you all for being with us. I'm going to turn off the recording now and you'll hear that message. And then after that, I'm going to invite people to, if they'd like to stay, please feel free to stay. And at that point, people can unmute themselves and say something. So just wait till you hear that the recording is over. Thank you all so much.